There's a mountain range 800 feet below the surface of the Pacific Ocean that submarines must navigate in total darkness. Thousands of miles away, Kendra builds equipment that guides these vessels safely. 2 years ago, she didn't even know there were mountains underwater. Career path upgraded. Learn more about careers in maritime manufacturing at careersbuilttolast.com. Paid for by the U.S. Department of the Navy in partnership with Blue Forge Alliance.
Tonight, Alan Joyce, the former Qantas king, is punished by having his payout docked by more than $9 million. Plus, the head of the mysterious group Muslim Votes Matters tells us for the first time on TV what's driving this divisive movement. And in Britain, ethnic riots, the dangerous mob overnight that the British police failed to mention. Also tonight, Australia now third on the Olympics medal table. But don't you think that's a bit weird? And new video of Kamala Harris's pick as Vice President shows him making false claims of having been in war. All that and much more. Barnaby Joyce, my book of the week. Don't recommend it if you're a bit sensitive. All that coming up. But first, another terrible day for the Prime Minister with a car crash interview here on Sky, plus something even worse. Anthony Albanese tried to deny in Sky News to Peter Stefanovic that even the Reserve Bank now says his big spending is driving up inflation, driving up interest rates and making you poorer.
This is the quote here from the RBA. Public demand is forecast to be stronger than previously expected, reflecting recent public spending announcements by federal and state governments. Are you saying they're wrong?
Yeah, that's very different. That's very different from the way that you characterised it, Peter. We've made sure fiscal policy, budget policy works arm in arm with monetary policy.
Well, that's not working at all because the RBA and Treasury are brawling at the moment.
That's not true, Peter.
Well, you're saying completely different things.
We agreed that inflation... No, we're not. No, we're not.
Peter was clearly right, the Prime Minister dead wrong. The Reserve Bank on Tuesday was clear when it said inflation was on a slower return to target than forecast in May, and this is due to greater inflationary pressures in the economy. In part, this owes to a stronger outlook for domestic demand led by higher public demand. Higher public demand means higher government spending, and that's hurting us. Now that, of course, was the most obvious embarrassment today for the government. Albanese doesn't understand how his big spending is hurting Australians, or he's lying. But there was another embarrassment, and in some ways more serious. This one involves billions of dollars of your money and the real risk the lights will go out. Now today, this news that SunDrive, an Australian company trying to invent a new solar panel, has had to cut maybe 50 staff and change bosses. What a surprise. Because last March, Albanese and Energy Minister Chris Bowen told us they were going to spend $1 billion of your money to get companies here to make solar panels, even though China makes them much, much cheaper. And they said this same SunDrive was getting some of that cash because it was the future.
The SunDrive has developed is the most efficient in the world. Why wouldn't you take that opportunity and have a future made right here in Australia? And that's what the $1 billion Sunshot program is about.
And Albanese also made this promise.
The people standing behind us will never be out of work because what they're doing is training for the jobs of today.
Instead, this same company that was with him right at that press conference and one that Albanese has already given $11 million to already is now dumping workers just 4 months later. Although the company does claim, oh, we're still charging ahead. And this bad bet is a pattern. The Albanese government is spending madly on wild green schemes looking for something, anything renewable that could replace the electricity that's going to be lost when it closes all our coal-fired power stations, the ones that's driving out of business. But it's been failure after failure. For instance, the Snowy Mountains pumped hydro scheme, now about 10 times over budget, hopelessly behind. Wind power, that's also way behind schedule with wind droughts and local protests against building more. And it gets even worse. Albanese and Chris Bowen, they've bet the bank on green hydrogen made by using massive amounts of electricity through, put it through water and get the gas, even though this has never been proved to work commercially at scale.
Our green hydrogen future is fundamental to that clean energy future as a powerhouse.
The green hydrogen sector has an enormous potential in this country.
Oh, it's fundamental, it's the future, but now the country's biggest private investor in green hydrogen, billionaire Andrew Forrest, is walking away from most of his own hydrogen plans, saying green hydrogen turns out to be just too expensive. Now, Albanese and Bowen didn't just promise to spend billions on green hydrogen schemes. They even promised very specifically they'd make the new Kurri Kurri gas plant in New South Wales use hydrogen. Months later, the plant operator said, no, it was impossible, another dud. But still, this government wouldn't get the message and promised even more of your money.
This budget invests in our renewable energy superpower ambitions, including $13.7 billion in production tax incentives for green hydrogen and processed critical minerals.
So here's this government wasting billions of your dollars on harebrained green schemes, including unproven technologies, with the clock running out. So it's getting so desperate now that Bowen even suggested last month we could hook up all the batteries in electric cars, if you have them, to power the electricity system when we're short. I mean, seriously. Yet all the while, this same government is now saying no to nuclear power, which is safe, it's efficient, it's proven. I mean, Bowen's even scoffing at the opposition's interest in new generation small nuclear reactors, or SMRs.
SMR, someday may be reality. I mean, if Peter Dutton really wants to bank Australia's energy policy, put all his energy policy on this science fiction pipe dream.
A pipe dream, Chris Bowen? In fact, there's news now that China is steaming ahead with nuclear power to lead the world with it, and it's just about to finish building the world's first commercial small modular nuclear reactor onshore, which it thinks will be a world beater.
This nuclear power plant, which uses the world's first modular small reactor technology, has completely rewritten the traditional definition of nuclear power plants. With the increasing global demand for clean energy, nuclear energy, as an efficient and low-carbon energy form, will occupy an increasingly important position in the future energy structure.
That's the future this government has turned its back on, blowing our billions instead on wild green schemes that are already collapsing. And this could hurt us even more than the Albanese government making inflation even worse with its spending. And I know that is saying a lot. Do you know, I found it astonishing to now see that students in one of our top universities now backing terrorists. There is a sickness in our culture. Almost 800 Sydney University students voted yesterday for their student body to back the supposed right of Palestinians to armed resistance, and voted almost unanimously not to condemn Hamas, an Islamist terrorist group that's actually banned here in Australia. And by the way, Hamas is the group that runs Gaza and started this war with Israel by slaughtering 1,200 Israelis, raping women, beheading men, and taking around 250 hostages, including children. But these students didn't just refuse to condemn Hamas, they backed its aim, which is the destruction of Israel. They said Israel should be replaced by just one Palestinian state. What happens then to the more than 7 million Jews there, you can only guess. Now, when one student tried to condemn Hamas, he was actually spat at. Now, when we have hundreds of our university students say, sure, Islamist terrorists have slaughtered all those people and raped and all that, can't condemn them. When we have these hundreds of students saying, sure, such violence is justified, how long before others say, well, yes, that includes violence like that right here? But there's another threat to our unity, and it's one that Sky News will be examining in a special investigation next Tuesday by our investigative reporter Jonathan Lee. It's in a documentary called Clash of Faiths, the fight for Muslim votes. And this is about the rise of a movement called Muslim Votes Matter, which has accused the federal government of being complicit in a supposed genocide in Gaza and wants to push more pro-Palestine and more pro-Muslim candidates into Parliament. I'm joined by the reporter who's done this investigation, Jonathan Lee. Jonathan, great to see you again. Look, you've got the first on-camera interview with the man behind Muslim Votes Matter, Gaith Graham. Who is he? What does he want?
Well, good evening to you, Andrew. I should probably start by pointing out where I am. I'm actually beside Bankstown Council Chambers, Paul Keating Park. In fact, you might wonder what the former Prime Minister would say about the fact that swathes of Labor voters are potentially lining up to desert the party at the next election. You're right, we did speak to Gaith Graham at his home in Melbourne. He's behind the Melbourne Votes Matters movement. He's the official spokesperson. It's one of two bodies now which are rising up, such as their outrage about what has happened in Gaza and the death toll in Gaza, chiefly to Palestinians. They want to, in effect, form a voting body. They don't want to create candidates themselves, at least not yet. And they want to do so in the hope of, I suppose you could say, strong-arming government, making sure that there is policy which favours Muslim voters. They say they're not the only group which does this. There's the Christian lobby, there's also the Jewish lobby, and they believe it's high time that they are also heard. Have a listen to what we had to say, and they're very clear that they believe the government has blood on its hands and it isn't doing enough to stop the war in Gaza.
How do we stand idly by when people in Gaza aren't even getting the bare minimum to survive, not to die of starvation and thirst? And our government has not done everything it possibly can.
You paint a picture there of a government which has got blood on its hands.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you have the ability to do something and you fail not to do it, then you're complicit in what goes on.
Well, I don't know how Australia can be complicit in a war we didn't start and we can't stop. But for me, Jonathan, it's scary that the implication here is that if you're Muslim, you must be anti-Israel and blind to Hamas terrorism, or so it seems to me. Is this the one big issue for Muslim Votes Matter? Palestine, Palestine, Palestine?
Look, it's certainly an issue which has galvanised them. We've been told that it's the straw in effect that broke the camel's back, which was what one person told us. We were here at Bankstown Council Chambers the other day when there was a pro-Palestinian group calling for council to look into Israeli contracts with council. They are seeking action. Andrew, it's very, very hard to describe the absolute outrage this community is feeling and experiencing. I've certainly never experienced anything like it in sitting down and trying to understand people's arguments and frustrations here. Tony Burke is also a Labor Party politician, a minister, the Home Affairs Minister now, potentially in the firing line with his seat of Watson. He compares it to what happened with the Teal movement, and he's also explicitly clear that he's not complacent about the threat here to his seat.
I remember, what we refer to as the Teal campaign started, and a whole lot of commentators scoffing and saying, oh, well, they won't get anywhere, politically inexperienced, whatever lines were being used. I'm not going to make that mistake, because the key to what happened in those seats was there is a legitimate grievance in those communities, and it was ignored. There's a legitimate grievance in my community, and I'm making sure that it's being heard and it's being represented.
I wonder what Tony Burke has in mind when he says they've got legitimate grievances that he won't ignore, given that he's also the Home Affairs Minister in charge of things like immigration, in charge of things like allowing people from Gaza, refugees from Gaza, which is a territory with big support from us, come here permanently. I mean, seriously, this is really alarming. But great work. That's a very interesting grab you got from Tony Burke. And the full documentary called Clash of Faiths, The Fight for Muslim Votes. Jonathan, you'll be screening it here on Sky News next Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Good luck to you with that. Thank you so much for your time. Meanwhile, Britain is showing us exactly what can happen when weak and dishonest politicians mishandle exactly what we were just talking about. I mean, first you allow mass immigration, including of people from areas and cultures which make it harder for some to integrate, plus Islamism. And then you trash your own culture, your history, your own institution. You pander to what you should confront, and you don't tell the truth either about all this. Now, in Britain, there's been a week of riots by nationalists and anti-immigration extremists and thug